welcome back to my YouTube channel, The Conversationalist TM. My name is Tanegile Bagambata and I want to welcome you to the conversation room. If you're joining us for the very first time, welcome. If you're a returning viewer or subscriber, welcome back and thank you for tuning in. So today's conversation is a continuation of the segment that we started in our previous video, which is the rise of women in a changing world, where we looked at the need for society to learn to embrace and accept women who are choosing a different path for themselves, who are narrating their own lives and living outside the box of what women should be that society has created, and living outside the binds of societal expectations of what a woman should be, but choosing to rather be and do what they see is best for themselves and for their lives going forward. Right? And today I just want to bring that a bit closer to home, in as much as we looked at the societal view and how it needs to be in the workspace. Today I want us to look at how it needs to look like in the personal space, right? Where, as someone who is a close colleague, a close friend, or even a partner of a woman who we're speaking about, a woman who is one, independent, self-sufficient, who is a strong-willed, a strong character, a strong personality, how do you then allow her to be who and what she has defined herself to be, and being okay with that, embracing it and learning to understand it? And for us to then start with that, I generally have this concept called the lion and the lamb. I usually talk about it when I talk about relationships. I am no relationship expert, but I do give a lot of relationship advice, which is like interesting. So I then came up in my, in operating as a relationship therapist, unqualified. I then came up with the concept of the lion of the lamb. But for today, I just want to limit it, of course, to the scope of the conversation that we're having today. And just to break down or to rather define what I mean by that. So the concept of the lion and the lamb basically means, how as women we tend to, because of the day-to-day roles that we're taking on, right? We tend to take on different personas. And the concept of the lion comes from when you are at work or when you are out there going about your day-to-day, where you have to embody the strength, where you have to embody a certain level of dominance, where you have to be watchful, where you have to be guarded, where you have to be ferocious at times, and you kind of like embody this persona as you go about the day. Whether it's in society, you're just walking down the street, where you have to make sure that you are safe, you're on the alert, you're not, an easy target because people think you're vulnerable because, the level of crime in this country, or you're in the workplace where you are, working day to day to cement yourself in a space, to create your own place in a space, to create a space where you have a voice and your voice is being heard. And in most instances, you're doing that when you're operating in your strength, when you're operating in the dominance of, fighting for your equal place in society. And the fight is not always aggressive, obviously. Sometimes we fight passively, sometimes we fight gently, but in any event, you're carrying this persona, and that is a persona of what I call the lion or the lioness. Someone who's out there, who is going for the win, in the jungle, fending for themselves. But then also the same person will then want to come back home to a space that is safe, to a space that is calm, to a safe where they can just lay their head and just put their guard down and just be, right? Be vulnerable, because that's what a lamb represents. A lamb represents a certain level of vulnerability, a certain level of innocence and purity, right? And when you've been out there fighting the whole day, you just want to come back home and you just want to just relax. You just want to be in a safe space and have someone or have people around you who are like, it's okay, you can breathe here, you don't have to have your guards down, you can rest a little. And that is a concept of the lion of the lamb. And how then that works is, as people who tend to be the ones that are relating with women who are living and operating in that dominance, and also need to have a space to be fragile, how do we then show up for them, and how do we show up in their lives in a manner that is meaningful and that is fruitful and that is helpful to them and to the relationship that we're building? So today's conversation is one-sided. It's mainly about how do we do things for this kind of woman so that she can be able to show up in society as who she needs to be and who she has decided to be, without necessarily feeling the burden of having to succumb to certain things and to then find themselves going back to having to live to society's perceptions, to their own frustration and to their detriment. And having been one who has been deemed and labeled this kind of woman a couple of times myself, I've actually gone on a journey where I've had to learn, one, to recognize when I'm operating in my strength and in my dominance, and also recognize when I need to actually operate in my vulnerability and my fragility. And it's not an easy thing to learn as the person, because the world calls for you to be strong all the time. You learn to be independent, you learn to be self-sufficient, you learn to be in strength, so much that when it's time for you to now relax and be fragile and be vulnerable, it is like you are fighting World War III. It's a mess, okay? It's a mess. It's a mental fight, it's an emotional fight, and you're just like, how can I be weak? And it's not being weak at all. It's just you being a full human being, because you need to balance the scales as a person, right? You can't always be strong, because that means you're gonna lack in certain areas of growth and development and showing up for yourself as a person. So then in that, I've also had to learn that it can be challenging for people around me to show up for me in a meaningful manner, because they then have to deal with this person who's transitioning into these different spaces. And the first thing that I've actually learned, and what I usually advise people to do, is to actually sit down and get to know the person behind the strength, right? You can be friends with someone for so long, but because you have identified them as a particular person, for example, in my case, I've had friends who have identified me as a strong personality, an independent person, and therefore that's how they related with me. And whatever happens, whatever I do, whatever they do, is within the confines of that definition of who I am. And therefore, when I start acting out of character, it becomes challenging for them to relate with me, because they're not used to that person. And then it strains the relationship, because now they're not showing up for me in a manner that I would need at the time, and I will not be able to show up for them because I'm on empty. I have not had my refill, right? And that then strains relationships, that then strains friendships. So the first step would be like, okay, fine, understandably, your first perception of this person is that they are this kind of woman. How do you then go beyond that and get to know the person behind the strengths? And that is what you would need to do as a person, so that you are able to show up for them better. You need to know them better. You need to understand them better. And then that is when now you need to put aside your perception of what would then be deemed an independent, strong personality, but rather to say, okay, fine, let's remove all of that. Let's get to know the person. Let's get to know, who are you, what drives you, what has made you become so strong, what has made you become so independent. And it's getting to know the person's story. And then from there, you are able to have a better understanding of who they are, that even when they operate in their strengths, you are able to understand why they're operating in their strengths. And therefore, that will then lead to you being able to create a safe space for them to actually not be so strong all the time, right? And that will then allow them to be able to be to operate in their fullness as a being. Because you are able to now create a safe space for them. You are able to create a space where they can be fragile and they can be vulnerable. And sometimes it's not even a lot of work. It's just basically saying, okay, fine, now that I understand who you are and I understand why you need to be like this at times, I would like to be a safe space for you where you can actually be like, you know what, I can just breathe. When you want to put your guards down, I can be the space for you where you just put your guards down. And sometimes it's just being there for the person. It's just being there. And if you see her cry for the first time, it's just being able to handle that, be able to take that in and to allow them to do that. If it's seeing them unable to show up for themselves, and you are just like, I don't know how to show up for you because you're always showing up for yourself, is to taking the time to learn how to then show up for them in that moment. And that means that you just need to be able to let them be and ask them, what can I do for you in this instance, and how can I be there for you in this instance? An example would be, I had a friend, we were friends for a very long time. And for the longest time, all he knew was this independent girl, and never really needed to do anything for me because, I'm always, showing up for myself, until I had a certain time in my life where I couldn't show up for myself in certain areas. And him being my longest friend at the time, I then needed to rely on him to show up for me, from an emotional, from a mental space. And it took quite a while. It was quite a challenge for him. And it was up until we had the conversation about how, strength and vulnerability can coexist in a person's personality. It needs to coexist in a person's personality. And learning that in as much as I come across as strong, I'm not always so strong all the time, and therefore those around me need to create a space where I can actually be vulnerable. Because one thing I learned in therapy the other day was, when you have lived your life so long being a self-sufficient person, it becomes very hard for you to then try to rely on other people or learn to rely on other people, because you don't trust that, one, you can do that, and two, you don't trust that they won't disappoint you, because it's an external force. Now with you, you can either show up for yourself, and where you can't, you're disappointed in yourself and you can handle yourself and you can deal with yourself. But if it's someone else who's external, it becomes quite a challenge, right? Because you don't know what the person's going to do, because you don't have control over that, because all along you've learned how to have control over how you show up for yourself. And therefore, learning how to do that, to rely on other people, would require those people to learn how to actually show up for you and to be there for you. So one is getting to know the person, understanding the person behind the strength, understanding why they operate in their strength. Secondly is to learn to then show up for them and to create a safe space for them. And you doing that is not only for them, but you're allowing yourself to also grow in the relationship, or to grow in the friendship, and how the two of you can then coexist in this space with with the differences that do exist. And most importantly, is you're gonna have to obviously let go of the perception that you have of people. And I think that's one of the the continuing trends when we're learning to engage with women, as women take up different spaces and take up different roles, is the breaking down of the perceptions that we have, right? And to stay away and to really avoid boxing people into certain identities, from a first instance, and to learn to be flexible with how we engage and how we relate with people, and to learn to be flexible with allowing people to be, because as human beings we grow, and sometimes we grow in our personalities, and sometimes we grow out of certain things that we, certain personalities or certain characters that we used to have, and we evolve into better beings. And sometimes you actually realize, like, what, but for life circumstances, I am not a strong person. I am an egg. I'm a vulnerable chiquita, but because of life circumstances, you've had to actually learn to be strong. And therefore, when you get to a point where life is much more kind and more gentle, you see yourself operating in your vulnerability, in your, in your fragility more often. And then it kind of, it's a mind-boggling thing for those around you, because now they're seeing this different person. And it's a matter of understanding, as people around those kind of people, to be like, okay, cool, I need to embrace this person, because this is who she is now, and this is who she is, maybe even going forward, or maybe it's a seasonal thing. But being able to say, like, I need to then open up my mind and be flexible enough to learn her, to embrace her, and to accept her as she is. And it could just well be that from there she's gonna spring back again and be the lion, and you're gonna have to be like, oh, okay, now we're lioning. And it's all about flexibility, right? It's about being open-minded, it's about being flexible, and it's about overcoming the biases that exist generally, whether consciously or subconsciously. Because once you create a first impression over someone, that's basically that's most likely to be the long-term effect, or rather the long-term perception that you have of them. And it's going to take time and certain things happening, learnings and unlearnings, for you to actually, like, oh, okay, I may have been wrong at my first impression. And you would need to do that as the other person, right? So now, how does that then fit into the bigger picture of the topic of the rise of women in a changing world? It's because women are having to show up differently, because women are taking on different roles, because women are not your typical woman. Not every woman would be your typical woman on societal's expectations. We then need to know how to relate with them differently. For example, in a romantic setting, as you know, the male species, you will then need to learn how to be able to engage romantically with this person, because number one, they probably don't fit what you would think a woman is. They probably won't fit your first expectation of what I'm looking for in a partner. And I say this because I had a conversation with a gent, I think about 2 weeks ago, guys. I'm always having these conversations. I had a conversation with a gent about 2 weeks ago, and he asked me a question. He was like, I have a girlfriend and I think she's like you. How do I learn to show up better for her? Because right now it seems like the things I'm doing are just not making the path to do. And having, just gauging from the conversation the kind of person she was, it was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is the kind of woman that we're talking about here today. And my simple advice actually at the time was, look, you need to first, I think as a gent in that kind of situation, you first need to identify what are you looking for in a woman, okay? And in most instances, from my personal experience, and from what I've seen happening around me, women have this ideal of who they're looking for. Men have this ideal of who they're looking for when they're looking for a partner in a woman, right? And they would have their tick boxes. I think we all do have, our little checklist of what we're looking for in a partner. But let's talk about men and women, specifically the man being the one that's looking. And once you have identified what you are then looking for in a woman, is to say, is this particular woman in front of me that kind of woman that I'm looking for? And if it's a yes, then great. The first hurdle is done. All you now have to do is just get to know her. And in getting to know her is just this, whatever that you were taught about what a woman is, what a woman should be, what you need to kind of put that aside. And you now need to carve what woman is the woman in front of you and the kind of woman that she is, and understanding her from that perspective and engaging with her from that perspective. And if you still want to pursue a romantic relationship with her, you then pursue it from where the both of you are, and without necessarily having the societal expectations of what a woman should be. Because you find that in the conversation I was having with this gent, it was, she's not necessarily the kind of woman who will be back at home at 6 to make sure that you have eaten and you guys maybe have kids later, and the kids have eaten, you're going to take them to bed. No, chances are you're most likely going to get home first, and you're the one that's going to have to make sure that the kids have eaten, and you're most likely the one that's going to take the kids to bed, okay? And in an instance like that, you're going to have to be okay with it, because society will probably tell you there's no ways, that's not how it's supposed to be. But for your guys' relationship and your partnership to work, you're going to have to be able to block that out and be like, you know what, my person is like this, and this is how we relate, and this is how I relate with her, and this is how our partnership works, right? And that level of flexibility and open-mindedness will help you to be able to engage with her in the beginning of the relationship, and for you guys to build how your partnership looks like and how your relationship looks like, especially if it's going to be a long-term situation. And what I learned from that conversation, generally, and from my experience with a couple of my guy friends as well who have been in similar situations, is just a general need. This is a general need. Let me just tap into the relationship aspect. I was trying to avoid it, but let me just tap into it for like a few seconds. It's just a general need for people to be realistic with themselves when they come into relationship space, right? If you're looking for a homemaker, if you're looking for a wife who just wants to be, they can have a career, not a problem, but they also want to be a homemaker, they want to be a wife, they want to be a mother, they want to do all these things. If that's what you're looking for, you need to be honest with yourself as a gent and pursue that. And the moment you meet something that is intriguing, that is exciting, that is interesting, but it does not meet what you're looking for, you need to be man enough to be like, you know what, love it, but this is not what I'm looking for. And then you need to step away. Because what then tends to happen is a gent will be looking for that in a person that does not have any of that. Well, not any, but that does not have that, you know. And in as much as if you recognize that the person that you like and the person that you're pursuing is a different kind of woman, you know, she has different kind of priorities in life, she has different goals, she has different ambitions. Like baby making and family building are not top of her list. They may be later, but in that particular time they're not, and they may never be. You need to then be realistic enough with the gent to be like, okay, am I able to handle this? Do I have the ability and the capacity to be a partner to this kind of person? And without frustrating each other, without frustrating the relationship, without frustrating the process of building a relationship. And if you realize that you actually don't, then my man, it's okay. It's okay. You will meet an amazing woman who will give you all that you want, but don't frustrate this one. Don't frustrate this one, because what ends up happening is that people then expect people to, you know, let go of themselves so that they can be molded into what they are expecting a partner to be, or they're expecting a woman to be in a relationship. And that is unfair. And that's what leads to some of these frustrating relationships, because you then end up having women who, you know, are forced to compromise. And because they're then forced to compromise, they then live out in this frustration of, I compromise myself for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the moment that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 does not work out, it then becomes a thing that they then look, you know, like they then take that, and it becomes an inward situation whereby, oh my god, I should have done better, oh my god, I should have done that. And that's not the kind of society we're trying to build with our generation. I know of quite a few women who have told their stories where they made certain sacrifices and certain compromises, and molded themselves into the, you know, the expected woman, the expected mother, the expected wife, only to, you know, 50, 30, you know, 40 years later to be like, you know what, I wish I made a better choice for myself. I wish I stood up for myself. And fortunately for us, in this generation, we are able to stand up for ourselves, I would like to think. And but also, it also takes the gents being able to be like, you know what I'm looking for is not in this chiquita, and I need to let go. Or what I am looking for is in her, and these are the compromises and the sacrifices I'm willing to make to be with her. And it just takes two people who will be honest and real with one another. Okay, that's on the relationship part. Right, so let's just go back to what we were talking about. Right. Let's just go back to what we are talking about, right? The concept of the lion and the lamb, and how we can show up for women who operate in the two, and sometimes struggle to then be the lamb, because they really do need to, right? We need to be wholesome, you know, balanced human beings who are able to live in between our strength and our fragility. So where was I? Got distracted with the relationship conversation. So now, how does all of that now fit into the bigger conversation that we're having here today? It's really simply a matter of, if we are able to show up right for people in their lives, it allows them to be better people, to do better in their lives. So for example, if I am a friend to, you know, the kind of woman that we're talking about in this segment, is my being able to allow her to flourish, to dominate, and to fulfill her purpose. You know, to go out there and be the lion and the lioness. I should also be able to be a safe space for her to come, and to be able to, you know, to live out in her vulnerability and her fragility, without me causing unnecessary barriers for her because of my own perception of, oh, but you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. But just to allow her to be, actually, to just be like, okay, cool, it's fine. I'm a safe space. You know, I can be a safe space for you, and you can, you know, you can then come and be that here. And much the same in a romantic relationship, where we don't have women who are, you know, doing the most out there, and being the king of the jungle out there, but then at home things are a bit of a mess because their partner is unable to comprehend the kind of woman that they have and the kind of woman that they are with, and it therefore creates that imbalance of, but it's a frustrating thing for a person, right? In any space where you are excelling in one area but another important area of your life is suffering because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and therefore as us, as the people who are external, as a romantic partner, showing up for her, and creating a safe space, creating a space where she can actually transition in between the two smoothly and lightly, will help me as well. Because clearly when you're in a relationship you want peace, right? And you are able to create that peace. And however, for us to get there, we really do need to get rid of certain perceptions, and to get rid of certain biases that we hold, and to get rid of certain ideologies that we hold about women, and especially women in relationships. Because we have seen, and I have seen rather, instances where you find that a woman has grown into being this person because she has occupied certain spaces. She has become the kind of woman that we're talking about today, but unfortunately she's stuck in a relationship where the person that she's with is unable to comprehend that because they still hold certain views that subject and limit women to be a certain way. And unfortunately it creates an imbalance in a person's life, right? Where they either stop being productive out there, because they have these internal frustrations, and sometimes they have to make a compromise, or you find that it's two beasts in one house at the end of the day, because now you have two people who are just unable to build this what's supposed to be a beautiful union, because relationships are supposed to be beautiful, love is supposed to be beautiful, but because now people are holding on to their own perceptions of what should be and shouldn't be without allowing themselves to become and to be in the relationship, it then frustrates the relationship. And I think with the concept of the lion and the lamb is understanding that, look, we need to allow people to grow. We need to allow people to become and create those spaces for them to do that. And in order for that to happen, it's gonna take work from us who are on the other side to be like, I recognize the person I'm in this particular relationship with, whether a friendship or otherwise. And therefore, if I want to stay in their lives and be in this relationship, I will then need to be able to show up for them in a way that will allow them to be that will allow them to to be the lion, go conquer, and then to be able to also be a safe space where they can regain their strength, to be able to do it again, and to do it again, and to also help them to become whole human beings, that are not always operating in this place of strength and dominance all the time, but they can be balanced in themselves to say, okay, fine, I need to be weak now so that I can be able to regain my strength. And therefore, by doing that, I would need to be a safe space, and me on the other side as a friend or a partner, I can do that for them, right? And that's basically the concept of the lion and the lamb. And I think those are the things we need to look into as we look at the kind of woman that we see rising in the spaces that we find ourselves in, and the kind of woman that we see growing or becoming in the spaces that we find ourselves in. And how do we as a society, as their loved ones, create spaces where they can just be, guys. It's so important to be able to be, without necessarily the judgment, without the unnecessary barriers, without condemnation, as harsh as that may sound, but we do tend to do that, and without necessarily forcing people to live up to standards that they have no business living up to, and just let them be and let them live the best life that they need to be living to fulfill their own purpose and their own goals and ambitions. And that is it for today on Conversationalist TM. I really hope that it's a conversation that sparks something, that sparks a certain change, that allows people to think differently, And if you find yourself in a similar situation, that you would look at things differently and think about these things more differently. That is what we're all about, right? Having fulfilling, meaningful conversations that will change how we think, that will help us to learn new things and unlearn all the necessary things that we need to unlearn. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed this session. Don't forget to subscribe, put on the notification bell, and tune in onto the next upload. For me, Tanegile Wagambata, the conversationalist TM, have a good one.